continue introducing ourselves. Nice to meet you, Dr. Ngure from Kenya. Kindly feel free to introduce yourself on the chat as we proceed. And then I'll take us through the program, the webinar objective shortly. I'm just going to share my screen as we officially begin this session. Okay. I believe you can all see my screen.
Yes, we can see. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. So it's an amazing year, and we are happy to have this seminar and have very many people join. So I'll just take a few minutes to take us through why we are doing this or what this is, what this project is. So this is research. This is a project called Research to Commercialization. And the idea is that we'll be having monthly webinars every second Thursday of every month. And today's agenda would be this introduction of the project, our different introductions that we're going through, that are going through in the chat. And then we'll have a project overview. I'll take us through a project overview. Then we'll have a panelist session. We have 2 panelists on board, and they'll be taking us through overcoming bureaucracy while trying to commercialize. And then we'll have a Q&A session at the end. And then lastly, we'll have an announcement and closure of this webinar. We intend to finish at 12 sharp, 12 prompt. So thank you very much for taking time to join us. We are very delighted. And the moderator for the panelist session will be Stephen Gugu. So this program is being implemented with various partners. The funder is FCDO, but then the collaborators, implementation collaborators are Kenya, as well as Victoria Ventures. We all appreciate that Kenya's mission is to develop and manage a dynamic national innovation system that facilitates these brilliant ideas being taken to the market, as well as Victoria Ventures' mission is to basically support entrepreneurs in matters entrepreneurial finance, evaluation, deal structuring, fund management, and several trainings that pertain to research to commercialization process. So this project has 2 main pillars, I would say. The first one is accelerator training, where we have the researchers being taken through an accelerator training. And the second pillar is the TOT, so training of trainers, training on the research to commercialization. So this one is focused more on institutional. How do we strengthen their research to commercialization process? So the first one is focused on researchers particularly, and we have 2 cohorts. So currently we have the first cohort that has 88 participants, and we'll be having the second cohort between July and December. So you can look out for the application for cohort 2, which should be out around March. That's the first pillar. And then we have the second pillar, the one I'm talking about, strengthening institutions, matters research to commercialization. And we have also 2 cohorts, one that will be done in February, and the other one that will start in August. So the background of this is that Kenya did several baseline survey reports last year to inform what are the gaps and how then does Kenya, in collaboration with various partners, support these gaps. So the way the program is set up, we have trainings, we have coaching, and we have direct linkages that we believe, after going through the project, the researchers should be able to make linkages or investment and commercialization meetings that actually bring out something to the table. And we have coaching, different topics on different topics, and we have 3 trainings on the different aspects as per the needs of the researchers. And the second pillar, which is the training of trainers, TOT, it entails a 1-week training, entails coaching, and a toolkit that this TOT will be able to implement within their universities. And I think that brings us to the end of our session, just the first introductory overview. And I think I would immediately hand over to our moderator for the session to introduce the panelists and take it up. Nice to meet you all. I can see several people are continuing to introduce themselves. Great to have you here. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Maureen, for that good overview on the project. I'll jump right in to make sure that we get as much juice from the speakers that we have for today, because they're really good speakers in this space of research commercialization. So I'm going to request Professor Goops. I've negotiated with him to make sure that he allows me to use the word Goops, because I may massacre his name. I'm going to request you to put on your video kindly, and Dr. James Wakiru to put on your video. So gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us for today. We really appreciate. We have a number of participants today who are interested to delve deeper into this topic of today, of how we overcome bureaucracy when you're trying to go towards the path of research commercialization within high institutions of learning and research institutions. So I'll start off by just mentioning your titles, and then I'll allow you to make a detailed introduction about yourself, because I looked through the CVs, and it's going to take me quite a bit of time to figure out which part to focus on. First off, we have Dr. James Wakiru. He is a senior lecturer at the Dedan Kimathi University, and he's in the mechanical engineering department. And secondly, we have Professor Goops Jakpal. He's a pro vice chancellor of business and entrepreneurship at the University of Suffolk in the UK. Both gentlemen are very experienced in this space that we're going to be speaking about. And my first question to both of you is going to be requesting you to do a more detailed introduction of yourself, to delve a bit deep in terms of what you've spent, what you've covered around the area of research commercialization, and specifically how you feel your institutions, your respective institutions, have played a role in this topic of research commercialization. And Dr. James, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you very much, Steve. Good morning to all that are joining in. My name is Dr. James Wakiru. I'm a senior lecturer, as you've alluded to, at Dedan Kimathi University of Technology in the Mechanical Engineering Department. I also am the director of the Startup Center, where we house both the Incubation Hub and the Startup Center. We look at the student from the research perspective all the way to commercialization of the research output that they have. In terms of my activities, I've been in the industry for the last 20 years, with 6 of those years also in the academia. So we've been trying to look at how now the industry and academia work together in terms of churning out research to solve problems in the industry. So in our university, I think the main basis is how we are handling our students from the innovations that they have to the actualization of those innovations to become businesses. So that's, in a nutshell, what I can say we are involved in. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Dr. James, and good to know about the stuff you're doing, with startups and supporting entrepreneurs to commercialize some of the ideas they come up with. Professor Goopet, Professor Goops.
Morning, everyone. Morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are. As Stephen said, I'm Professor Goops Jakpal. I'm the Pro Vice Chancellor of Business and Entrepreneurship at the University of Suffolk. I've been working in higher education for about 20 years now, involved in the enterprise, the entrepreneurship, and the innovation space. I've worked at multiple universities, both in the UK and nationally, internationally, and a mixture of what we call traditional research-intensive universities and your more modern universities, where a lot of the research is applied in its nature. My involvement in commercialization, technology transfer, etc., has been in terms of enabling academics and researchers and PhD students to explore pathways to commercialization and technology transfer. But then also now more recently, what I'm involved in is setting up the policies and the frameworks within the institution that allow our academic colleagues, our researchers, and our PhD students to be able to see their pathway to commercialization, and for us to be able to support them. So here at the University of Suffolk, where I'm currently at, this is a relatively new agenda for us. We've only been a university since 2016. Our priority focus for the last 5-6 years has been on teaching and learning, but we are now really ramping up our activity around research, around innovation, and around business engagement. So we have recently had our IP and commercialization policy approved. We've got our first trademark working its way through that policy, and we are beginning to explore other areas of our research that we think can lean themselves to a commercialization. So a lot of that will come out as we continue the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that good introduction, and congratulations on having your R2C policy approved. I think one of the, and maybe just to lead up with that as a question, last year we had the SEAL Summit, the Commercialization, Entrepreneurship and Installation Summit in Mombasa in Kenya. And one of the key conversations that was taking place during that summit was the fact that if you look at a number of Kenyan universities and research institutions, we've not been as successful in terms of commercializing the research that's coming from, PhD students, researchers, and so forth, as we have been on the technology side of things, where if you look at Kenya as a country, we are one of the leading economies across the continent. And, when we tried to delve deeper into that, some of the key things that started coming out were the issues around policy, around ensuring you have the right policy, the right level of support to be able to move the conversation all through. So I guess my first question is, and Goops, I'm going to start with you, Professor Goops, I'm going to start with you. First of all, what are the key ingredients? I mean, if you want to commercialize innovations in your institutions, what would you say are the key ingredients you need to have in place before you sort of start seeing those results coming through?
Thanks, Ian. I think for me that there are probably three key things, and I think I may have mentioned this when I was in Mombasa. One is as a university, as an institution, you need to have clear policies and procedures in place, right? So when you need to know what you're going to do with the research, if you are to commercialize, that needs to be agreed within the institution, that needs to be communicated to the colleagues that are engaging in research and are potentially going to engage in commercialization. So very clear policies and procedures in terms of what is the university's position on commercialization. I think the second thing then is linked to that is you need the buy-in from the top of the organization, right? You need to have your vice chancellors, your pro-vice chancellors, your senior leadership team, your executive team, and even the university's board bought into that process. So when you're developing your policies and procedures, they are an integral part of that conversation. Because what you don't want is to start someone on a path of commercialization, and then someone suddenly puts a barrier in the way and says, actually, no, I don't agree with that. I don't think we should do a spin out. I think we should license, or I don't think that the academic should have that equity stake. I think they should have this percentage. If all of that stuff is agreed in terms of broad parameters earlier on, it makes that commercialization process a lot easier and more efficient and more effective as you go through it. So the clear policies and procedures with the buy-in from the top. And then the third and final point really for me is around using that to drive a culture across the institution where commercialization is recognized, it's valued, and it's supported. So, it's not an outlier, so it's not only a few people do this, but actually everyone has the opportunity to get involved, and everyone can see that they have the opportunity to be involved and can see what part they can play in. And a big part of the culture piece for me is around celebration as well. So when you've had a success and someone has been through that process and you've had your first spin out or you've signed your first licensing deal, is how do you disseminate that across the institution? How do you celebrate that across the institution and use that as a vehicle to inspire more people to engage with the process and start thinking about commercialization from the moment in which they start their research? It shouldn't be an afterthought. They should be thinking about it right from the offset and thinking, what are my pathways to commercialization, if any, at the end of this project, at the end of this research? So buy-in from the top through the clear policies and procedures, and then a culture of celebration and a culture that rewards and recognizes commercialization.
Thanks for that. And maybe just coming to you then, Dr. James. Dedan Kimathi University is one of those universities which is seen as, having a certain level of success, in this space of research commercialization. I guess for me, the question for you is that let's put some color into the points, and feel free to add if you think there's any other ingredients that you think for you is critical. But then on top of that, just create for us some color in terms of just how easy, how difficult, what does it take to be able to do these things that Goops has mentioned in 3 points, and in sort of like, in less than sort of like 5 minutes. But I'm sure they don't happen in 5 minutes when you want to do them when you're on the ground.
Thanks, Steve. I think I concur with Prof. Critical in the structures and administration of the whole space of entrepreneurship and innovation. And I will add, it's also very important to integrate entrepreneurship in research, such that people who are researching should not be looking at just research per se. I want to do a research and come up with something new, but should be looking at the end from the beginning. I need to have a product, an MVP that I can put it out there. And when you have such kind of ideology in and put in the students and all the researchers and entrepreneurs, then whatever they are doing, they're not looking at just a research. They're looking at, am I going to solve a problem somewhere? Is it just to get my documents or to get my certificate? So having the end in mind is very important. And of course, the support from the university is also very, very important, because you find in research, most of the products and services that we produce are basically more of technology. Come in our space, we are more or less so much into academia. So coming out here to commercialize the product and service becomes a bit tricky, because we are more focused on academia, yet the demand is beyond academia. So support from the university, like collaborations with the industry, the triple helix format, having the government, having the academia and the industry coming together, but of course fueled by the university, will really help in terms of commercialization of our ideas. Coming to what Prof has said, I think it's not easy to come up with these policies. One is because it's a gray area. It's an area that we have not really gone into. It is something that we are also trying to grapple with in terms of a new idea, and we have to come in and do this. And I think the main thing here is to work with people who have been there again, who have been there before us. That will really help in terms of being held in our hands by other institutions who have gone through this, especially in the developed countries, to just come up with this kind of policy. But of course, we have to tailor-make it to our context, because what we have in Africa is not what is in Europe. The kind of technology we require in Africa might not exactly be what is required in Europe. Our problems are slightly different in how we address them. So we have to contextualize all this and bring them together. Thank you.
I think, Dr. Jim, just staying with you and the point of contextualizing and so forth. So, we have eight innovators that we're working with through this accelerator, and they've identified some very specific challenges that we think are very relevant for our ecosystem, for where we are. One of the big challenges that then exists is that how do you then get them through to the point where, whatever policy that is in place is now being used to ensure that, one, maybe it's a spin-off, one, maybe it's you've commercialized, the IP has been licensed to a different organization and so forth. And that takes quite a bit of time. And I guess I'm asking myself, back to you, how exactly do we then do this? Because it seems we know the problems, people are researching, not as much as we'd like them to, and we're getting some really good output out of that. But then there's this middle part of making the system work, cutting through the red tape to ensure that if I'm an investor and I want to come in and I want to put in cash, I'm able to do that into an entity that I understand really well. What's been your experience at Dell and Kimathi? How did you sort of navigate those waters?
Well, I think the first thing is to look at the minimum viable product that you're producing. To what extent is it appealing to your audience? That's a very important thing, because your audience are the ones who are going to give you the feedback. They're going to give you the initial customers that you want to handle. And if you don't have such kind of a base, then it becomes hard to sell your idea out there to the investors who want to come and buy into your idea. You must have had a lot of assumptions when coming up with your prototype and the MVP, but can you validate that? Because that is what somebody wants to see. A capitalist who wants to come into your market, into your space, would like to see how viable your product is. Is it easily to be commercialized? And that is when you have already tested the waters. The product has already been tested and tried by some clients and given you feedback, and you're able to improve it. And of course, you also want to avoid overbuilding. You can create something too much beyond what is expected in the market. You can come up with a solution that is basically taking you to the moon, yet we're supposed to be on the ground here. Yeah. So I think it's a nutshell, trying to be so realistic as possible with what we are developing. But we have to see, where is it going? Which problem are we solving? So we should have that kind of ecosystem that we're able to identify the problems, come up with a solution, and then show anyone who wants to come in and invest in it how this is proving to be a solution. And of course, we'll have very good proof of performance in terms of our solution. Thanks.
Thanks, Dr. James. I think, Professor Goops, just coming back to you. You've been, I don't know, it's fortunate, or you've taken some challenging assignments where you've worked with institutions where you started where there was nothing, and you've created the policies. They've ran through all the way. You've probably created this culture about getting support from the top, and eventually even getting some trademarks done. So what's been then your experience? How have you done this? And how would you say then? How does someone navigate these waters? And I just want to create a bit of color to the initial points that you put through.
Yeah, and James made a very valid point. So what the approach I take is I will look at what policies exist in other organizations, and what I'll try and do is find organizations that are similar to my own organization. And also, I've got the benefit of the experience of having worked at 6-7 different institutions and engaged with their IP and commercialization policies, so I can draw on those experiences. So, the first bit is to really look out there, what's already out there, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel. But the point that James made, I think, is a really valid point, which is that then has to be contextualized to your own institution, your own areas of research, and the geographical region within which you operate, and the policy environment within which you operate. So it isn't a straightforward lift and shift. It's kind of a lift, do some work, and then shift it in. And part of that shifting process is actually about having the dialogue and the conversations within the institution. So you've got to engage the end users that are ultimately going to engage with that policy in designing and shaping that policy. So, when you're talking about equity rights, for example, you need to have those conversations with your finance people, your academics, your board, to make sure that everyone contributes. So the dialogue and co-creating that policy is really, really important. So, please, what I'm not saying is just take my policy and implement it in your institution. It's not going to work. You've got to take people through a process. The other thing, and James made a really valid point here, is, do your academics actually want to do it? That's a big question, because you could spend a lot of time trying to build the culture, do all the policies, etc. But if your academics are not interested in commercialization, it's not going to go anywhere. And again, for that, you need to have a procedure in place that says, okay, if an academic decides they're not going to engage in the commercialization, does the university still want to continue with that commercialization journey? And how are they going to do it? I've worked in institutions where it isn't, academic to say, actually, all I want to do is research and produce my papers. I'm not interested in minimal viable products. I'm not interested in taking it to market. And that's perfectly fine. If everyone is clear about that, and then the university said, okay, you don't want to do it, but we've got a team over here that are going to take that research, engage with an organization externally, and take it to market. And again, that forms part of your policy. And the final point just on that is, work, I think, is really, some of my work is concentrated on working with PhD students and early career researchers in changing their mind about what it means to be an academic. So actually working with PhD students and saying part of your role moving forward is actually to look at commercialization, is actually to think about how your research can be translated into industry, and taking them through innovation, enterprise, entrepreneurship programs as part of their PhD journey, so that they, when they enter the world of academia as an academic, are already have that mindset around innovation, commercialization, entrepreneurship.
Thanks. And you know, I like the point of, you know, do they want to do it in the first place? Because, you know, you could do all the work, and if the researchers are not sort of like interested in focusing on that, you know, you might have all the policies and so forth and create all the pathways, but you don't have people running through those pathways. Coming back to you, Dr. James, and I mean, the two recognize, I mean, and I don't know whether there's others, there's licensing on one side as recognized path towards commercialization. And then we also have the other path, which is, you know, spin-offs. So I just want you just to speak more about those two different elements, and probably just what are the pros, what are the cons from an institutional perspective? What do you need to think about when you're sort of like pursuing those different perspectives? And I think you've frozen. I don't know that you can hear us. Dr. James, are you with us? Sorry, I think we might be having some internet challenges. Professor Goops, then it means you have to answer the question.
Yeah,
you know,
that's the question.
I don't know, did you hear the question? Did you hear the question?
No, just try again, sorry.
Okay, cool. So I was just saying, so the two sort of like recognized methods of commercializing research is licensing on one side, and then there's the other side, which is spin-offs, right? And I don't know whether there's others, feel free to add if there's others that you see which are used often. So I wanted just to speak about both of those, you know, pros, cons, you know, as an institution, if you're thinking about either of those, what should you be considering, you know, what factors do you take into account to make sure that then, you know, that they're successful, you know, as you push them through?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think for me, the kind of the choice between the two really comes down to the kind of the research that you're doing and what level of risk you want to expose the university to, and also then your commercial partner that you're trying to work with. What is it that that's going to get them excited? What is it that's going to get them interested? But the risk appetite of the university is a really interesting one, because with a spin-off, you're then investing in that organization, whether it's a subsidiary of the university, whether it's done through a commercial arm or whatever. The university has a vested interest at a commercial and a strategic level because they own a part of that organization. And for me, it's with the spin-off is, do you have the expertise within the university to both create that spin-off and then be able to run and manage it moving forward? And that has to factor into your thinking of when you're looking to do a spin-off. And you know, the spin-offs are great because you can take it away from the university. It's got its own governance structure. It's got its own policies. It's got its own procedures. You've got external people on board, etc., etc. So, you know, it's arm's length from the university. It's risk. You can manage your risk. On the licensing front, in a sense, what you're saying is, we've got the intellectual property, you can buy it from us, do what you want with it, and we just expect a return to drop into our bank account once a year, or, you know, whatever you agree. And it is very much then left out there, other people are dealing with it, and you're just collecting a royalty. So you have very little to do with the day-to-day running of it. So if you're lacking that resource, you want to take a slightly more risk-averse approach, licensing might be the way to do it. And particularly in some of the organizations I've worked at, when you're doing drug discovery, for example, often a lot of that is done through a licensing route rather than a spin out. When it comes to tech, you might do a spin out and then get it to a point where you want someone to buy it, for example. So, you know, pros and cons, I think it comes down to individuals, where you are as an organization, and critically the research and the technology and what it leans itself to in terms of the right path.
Thanks, Professor Goops. And Dr. James, we lost you just when you were asking the question, but welcome back. I think maybe just taking the same question and trying to dig a bit deeper into the question and asking, you understand the Kenyan context really well, and where we are at, different institutions and so forth. You're based here. In your view, do you think for institutions that are trying to do this, should we generally have a general rule, start with the licensing and then eventually go into sort of like spin-offs and so forth? What's been your experience just looking on the ground, what's happening, and how do you think institutions are ready to be able to go spin-offs? Because what I heard from Professor Goops is the fact that spin-offs are much more complex to manage. You need to have a technical team, you're taking a bit more risk from an institution perspective and so forth. Do you have any views around that?
Thanks, and sorry, I went off briefly. Thank God I'm back. It's quite a tough situation when you talk about spin-off, and it basically could be contextualized as what Prof is talking about on the product you want to produce, and especially the kind of research that you have undertaken so that you can now create this spin-off company. I think one of the main ways the universities or the higher education institutions could come up with is the bureaucracy that is formed when dealing with such spin-offs from the university will be addressed by having maybe some independent, we can say, companies formed that the university could have some shares, some shareholding on the same. And of course, the researcher who is churning out this research. The agreements as well that we come up with, especially the collaboration agreements, as we are collaborating in that industry, we could be able to tweak it in a way that the actual work is being done in this setup that is independent from the university, though we still own it, because there's a lot of red tapes that come when you are dealing with bureaucracies in big institutions. So such things in terms of the residence of the collaboration agreements where we undertake them, as well as undertaking things like contract research, taking that contract research option. Because we're looking at a problem and we're trying to solve that problem. And that problem is not in the university, it's not in the higher education institution, it's out there. So that will, of course, shift the focus to where the problem is and where we're providing the solution. And we reduce a bit of the red tapes that we have and be able to see this solution basically is not ours. It belongs to the industry. And that will help in navigating towards taking the spin-off right to where it's supposed to be. Thanks.
Thanks. And I'm seeing there's a number of interesting comments which are coming in the chat. If you've just joined us, the conversation is ongoing. I'm going to open it up to Q&A in a second after this comment I'm about to make, or this question I'm about to make. So feel free to type out your question in the chat. Maureen, please help me in terms of picking this, because I'm enjoying the conversation on one side. I'm trying to look at the chat and I'm finding it difficult to multitask. But one of the key comments which has come from Professor Romano is, he says the sticky bit has been the entry point of the investors and the role of the university. And he says when they crafted a policy, the DNA of the policy is that the startups should be autonomous and free of the university interference, in as much as the university owns a stake up to 10% in this case. And maybe just to take this as a comment and look at some of the experiences that we've seen, where most of these new initiatives are pushed to the consulting arm of the university. And then you have parallel students who are sort of like charging their fees in the same entity. You have new sort of like innovations that are being done. And I guess, Dr. James, just coming to you, how easy is it to, to make these policies work, where the university is comfortable taking this 10% stake and leaving the rest sort of like for the innovator? And what's been your experience? Because the understanding I have is that in theory, the papers are there and they justify that. But once you come to the support in terms of, now let's do it, let's incorporate this company, the university has 10%, then people get the sense that the university has done much more and should probably have much more equity around that.
Okay, I think it's where we say where the chicken, the egg, yeah? Because for the university, we've been involved from the conceptualization of this idea, try to bring it up all the way to now it's becoming a spin-off, yeah, for example. So it becomes a bit tricky if, as a university, to let loose of something that they see, they have held it from the infancy. Yeah? I think it's something that needs to have some variations. Let's the universities come up with some bit of flexibilities, depending on the kind of spin-off that is coming out. Let's agree, let's discuss in terms of shareholding. And I think with that, then both parties will be able to sit down and say, I'm okay with the trajectory that this spin-off is taking. Otherwise, if we are cast on stone in terms of the policy, it is 10%. And you find out, which is a true fact, some of the activities really being done from the universities, they're so intense. I'm not really trying to fight for the university as such, but I think it should be a give and take. Let's see what kind of contribution the university has given into this, and then can we agree on the kind of shareholding? And then both parties now will be able to at least be in a good mood while going forward. Yeah? Thanks.
And thanks. And that's a good point where we shouldn't have a one size fits all. And generally, I agree with that, right? Because there's a nice startup book called The Founder's Dilemma. And it says that whenever founders come together, the general rule is to have a 50-50 split, right? Just to make sure that it looks like it's fair. But usually it doesn't portend really well because you go in and find that someone doesn't add as much value, so then it says, have that difficult conversation at the beginning. So Professor Goops, coming to you, how do you balance these, in a university, you have the staff in the university, all the way from the top, the negotiation starts. It's probably at that point, I don't think it's priority, if you ask me. The policy is there, but the conversation could go on for very long. But remember, investors want to move really fast. Right. So how do you balance between these? Let's not have a one size fits all rule. So let's negotiate and let's make sure we have something, but let's also do it in an expedient manner.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good question. I think for me, it's about making sure that the people doing the negotiation are the right people around the table. So it won't necessarily be your academic colleagues, no disrespect to my academic colleagues, but it would be the academic colleagues maybe with a technology transfer manager, a commercialization manager, etc. Someone that understands the university's policy around it, but then also understands the commercial aspects of trying to get a deal done, the pace at which you need to work, how you need to negotiate, etc., etc. And it is a collaborative team effort from the university to try and do that. I think the point about equities and ownerships is always an interesting one you can debate for forever, always brings a smile to my face. Universities are great at saying we want everything. Yeah, we want 110%, but we're not willing to take any of the risk. Right. So we want it all, but we want you to take, or industry partner, we want you to take the risk. And I'm sorry, but the world doesn't work like that. And for me, the deal comes down to who's bringing what to the table. Yeah. And absolutely the intellectual property, the research is an integral part of that. However, that's a piece of research. And without the industrial partner coming on board or your investors coming on board, it's a piece of research. So you've got to value the contribution that external partners, the university, are making in that conversation. So you're absolutely right. It isn't a one size fits all, and it's 25%, 25%, 40%, 10%. You can't come up with a figure and say, right, this is it. You've got to have that conversation because every deal you do is going to be different. For me, it's about having the flexibility and understanding that whoever is taking the greatest risk should probably receive the greatest reward.
I feel as though in the next webinar, in one of the next webinars, what we should do is almost have case studies to dissect that, right? Because it's a very tricky conversation to be able to move from whether it's going to be a 10%, a 40%, how to value everything. Because remember, the pie is not cooked. The pie is only half cooked and nobody can eat it at that point. So we need to, cook it and then take it to market. And at times, who knows how it's going to play out. But I think that would be an interesting conversation maybe to have at a subsequent point. But thank you for those points. I'm thinking there's a question here from Kezia. And Kezia asks, how can universities ensure continuity in the path of commercialization, right? That you keep it going. That is not just a one-off, that you have one innovation that you've taken into market and then the next one coming after 5 years. Dr. James.
Thanks for that question. And I think I just continued alluding to what we've been saying, bringing the entrepreneurial mindset into the students is very important. Let them know whatever they are doing can have value out there. And so they'll be looking out for these opportunities. They'll be looking out for these opportunities, and you'll be finding them now coming up to say, I have this idea, I have this idea, I have this idea. That in itself will ensure that there's no death in terms of coming up with innovation in our institutions. Very, very important is also giving them a platform that they can come and try out what they have and fail. Because we know for any startup, of course, you got to fail in one way or the other. Do they have that platform that they can come and try what they have? And even if they'll fail, somebody will guide them. Somebody will help them. Someone will tell them where they have failed and guide them in terms of how they can do the next thing. So with that kind of context and ecosystem, then you will have more ideas coming out. Come up with also things like contests where students can be able to always come up with ideas and compete. So this will keep them always thinking. Of course, the idea is not really getting an award, but of course, trying to come up with that concept and the ideology in the student and whatever area that we are working in, that we can keep on inventing, we can keep on innovating and coming up with new things. Maybe that's, in a nutshell, something that I could add there.
Thanks, Dr. James. I like those points around, culture, basically, how we change the mindset from the beginning that, you could build something of commercial value, the idea of, consistently having contests where people can be able to showcase, and it becomes sort of like something that you're doing on a day-to-day basis or continuously, and that keeps the innovations then coming through the path. Professor Boots, I don't know that you have any points to add on top of that, and as you're adding that, I'm going to ask another question, and the other question is just around, pitfalls. Right? We've spoken about how you do it, how it's really good and so forth. What are some of the pitfalls that a university then should be having at the back of your mind as they're pushing through commercialization? And I guess we should also look at it from the perspective of the researcher also, and how to sort of like think about addressing those. Over to you.
Yeah, so just on the first point, I think I'll just go back to one of my other points around celebrating successes when they've happened, and disseminating that widely across an institution to inspire. And I agree with James and the point I made earlier about encouraging the next generation of academics to have this mindset as part of their research journey. I think in terms of pitfalls, probably three things to mention, really. One is around not having clear understanding of IP ownership. So where does the IP sit, who owns it, and what can be done with it? The other one is really, what is the role of the university? And the third point is around investment. So a lot of the points that we've touched on, at what point do you go out for investment? Do you have the investment network to be able to access an investor network that wants to engage with you and can engage with you, importantly? What role does the university want to play in that commercialization? And it goes back to your earlier question, Stephen, around spin outs, licensing, or actually saying, this scares us, we have no idea, we don't want to do anything with this. And then linked to that is, what happens with the intellectual property, who owns it? It's very clear in most UK universities, intellectual property is owned by the university, and the university then decides what to do with it. It's not owned by the academics. undergraduate students own their own OP. But for everyone else, typically it's owned by the university. And it's having very clear ownership and then guidelines of what happens with it.
Thank you. IP ownership, role of the university, and the investment side of things. Dr. James, do you have any other views from the ground that you've seen that universities need to think about as pushing through these policies and commercialization?
Yes, thanks so much. I think it's something also important to look at the entrepreneur, the innovator. Is he ready for the market? What are skills does he require, or what skills is he deficient of? So we, as a university, we need to bring out the entrepreneurial mindset completely into the student, but come up with some programs that will lift the student from the level they are. And when we started, we said we more or less on a technical angle, but the market out there will not see us as a technical person. We need to know the dynamics in the market also. So the university also should be able to look at the market dynamics, look at the legal issues. Of course, the IPR comes in, but also legal issues in terms of novelty of what you are doing. There'll be contests. People say, no, we've also done this and this. Yeah? And so yours is not what is there. And of course, how to navigate, especially what we know as the valley of death. The university should come out very clearly. The institution should come out very clearly with strategies on how they would help in that navigation process. Because as I've said, we have to look at where we're starting from. We are not businessmen. Yeah. So we have the product, but we don't know how to push it out there. So we have to navigate very clearly, and the university should be able to look at those kind of pitfalls and come up with strategies that will help the innovator.
Thanks for that, Dr. James. I'm seeing this, the last question before we go to closing remarks. This has been, I feel like we just started and yet we have to finish. I'm seeing Peter Kibet has 2 questions, and I think we can split the questions. Dr. Goops, probably can, Professor Goops, you can take the first one. So the first one is, how can organizations measure the success of their commercialization efforts? I think that's to you, Professor Goops. And then Dr. James, maybe you can take this. What are some of the best practices for research organizations to collaborate with private sector for commercialization? I think we'll finish at those. We'll finish with those questions. And yeah, how has the coach practically done this? I think that's the other point that has been added by Professor Ntakani. So, Professor Goops, maybe you can start with that.
Yeah, I can give you probably 3 or 4 metrics. So one is the number of innovation disclosures. So the number of your academics that are declaring that they've got something that can be commercialized in terms of their research. And that just is a pro forma that says, professor, doctor, whatever, in this area, this is what I think. So how many of those are you receiving as an institution each year? Patents, interestingly, yeah, useful. I always then push back and say, okay, you might have 10 patents, but what have you actually done with them? Innovation disclosures, patent. And then I think it's about how many licensing deals have you done? How many spin-outs have you created? And then off the back of those 2, you will have revenue, investments secured, jobs created, etc., etc. So you can fan this out as much as you want, but I think the basic ones are around the innovations, the patents, the number of licensing deals, and the number of spin-outs created.
Thank you. Dr. James, to the best practices and specifically how the CUT has done it, the Human University has done it.
Thanks so much. I think we might not say there's cast on stone of where you can do something, but I think one way of reigniting and making sure that these innovations with the industry are there is seeing ourselves as problem solvers, that we are solving problems in the industry. That is very, very critical, because when we go out there to any industry, to any business, and we pitch ourselves as a problem solver, then we need to pick a problem and solve it. Now, the methodology of how we are solving this problem, that's already an idea that can be used out there as a spin-off. So that is one of the key areas we've been trying to enhance. We see ourselves as problem solvers. Secondly, getting the support from the, of course, the top management, that's the university, where the startup companies can, of course, apply for some seed capital, especially to navigate where you are starting before you start scaling up. Lastly is, can we have a dedicated, but limited, we have a dedicated but limited value chain. Whatever you need in the chain in terms of your innovation or spin-off, the designers, the developers, the investors themselves, can we be able to see where can we get them? And the suppliers, and of course, critical, the consumers of your product. That's a very important thing that as a university also we're trying to see, how can we fix all these chains, all these dots together to make the chain as one. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I like those points in terms of, the university being very deliberate in terms of the role they're playing to ensure that, we're not just waiting for the cake to be baked, how we part of that process of baking the cake as early as possible to make sure that, we can enjoy it at the end. Gentlemen, we have to finish. I feel like we've just started and we have to finish already. Of course, the conversation goes on. We have monthly webinars. There's another one coming in 2 weeks' time, which of course we urge everybody to attend and to keep the conversation on research and commercialization going on. But my final question to you, and this is your closing remarks, is give us one one case study that you've gone through. What you learned from that in terms of a commercialization journey that you've taken. What you learned from that people can sort of go away with something just very tangible and practical as you do your closing remarks. And I'll start with you, Professor Goops.
Just very quickly in recognition of the time. I did have one academic at one particular university who got so diluted in his shareholding, he ended up with pounds in his pocket rather than thousands or hundreds of thousands, and the deal that was done on his particular drug was in the tens of millions. But he got diluted so much along that investment journey that ultimately when that drug went to market, he was only getting pounds. So be aware of the pitfalls of getting diluted as a shareholder.
It's not all roses. Once you've gotten the deal, you have to keep watchful as the deal is going on. Thanks for that, Professor Goops. Dr. James.
Okay, Goops, Prof, I think that's very nice. For me, let me just give some of the key things I've seen, maybe as a part in short. That failure basically is the ingredient of the success that we are after. Let's not fear failure. And I think that is where we are all at. When you're starting something, we are fearing the failure. And starting, we just have to start something. Let's not procrastinate. That's the antidote of fearing to start, of course, is starting itself. And then, of course, the skills. Let's be realistic. If I don't have the skills, let me get those skills and be ready to go out there into the market. I rest my case there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. That has been and now it felt like it was just 5 minutes. I really appreciate your insights, and I think I was just looking at some of the comments. Everybody saying it's been a very insightful hour for them, and we're hoping we'll keep it at the same tempo as we get to the second and the third and the 12th webinar in this case. So I'm just going to request everybody, if we just, we can't clap for everyone at the moment because we're not here, but we can go back to the view where we're able to see everybody, and you can just use your emoticon to just give a hand to our speakers for today. So let's unpin. I think it's always good to do that. Then we'll count down to our claps. Okay, so guys, everybody, if we just show our appreciation to the speakers by just having a clap for everybody. I think we'll use emoticons, but if you want to do it live, also you can do it live. That's fine. I'm seeing people are also putting on their cameras and they're doing the actual clap. So whatever works for you, feel free to do that. Thank you very much. I think, gentlemen, you can see the appreciation from everybody else. Maureen, I'll pass it to you in 30 seconds to make the final announcements, and then we can close the session. Thank you very much. Maureen, do you have any final announcements, or shall we? You're on mute, you're on mute.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. This has been insightful. This has been, the tempo has been right. We have been able to uncover, several elements of how to overcome the bureaucracy. And I think for me, I was noting, just a few highlights to say, what does float your boat as an institution? What does float your boat as a researcher? What is it that would work for you as an institution as well as a researcher? And I think there was an element of, how do we then define the shares for this research enterprises, or so to speak. Then there was an element of, a little bit of flexibility, give and take a little bit. And then there was, I think the last thing that I thought made a lot of sense is this element of culture. So we talk a lot about culture and mindset, but I'm looking at it now more from a rewards perspective, from how do we set up the reward system, or how do we then celebrate these researchers who want to commercialize, and we having in mind that we want this continuity. And so just one announcement for the next session. We have our next session on the 26th of January. That's on Thursday from 11, same time as this, from 11 to 12 p.m. East African time. And we'll be talking about IP protection and management. Or of course, today we had a little bit about, how do we go about the IP protection? So that brings us to the next session. And we hope that you will all be able to join. We'll definitely bring, again, interesting panelists like we have had today. So thank you very much. And one last thing, we'll have these webinar sessions every other month, every second Thursday of every month, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. apart from the one that is coming on the 26th. So thank you very much, Professor Goops. Thank you very much, Dr. James. Thank you, SG, for moderation. I think we can then call it a day.
Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure. Best of luck. See you soon.